So, welcome to an attempt to model what constitutes a sustainable local food system for a rural community, which was a topic proposed in our last session on applied systems thinking by Harry Christie. And the idea was that we will simply attempt to look at the situation and develop a deeper or broader understanding of why that's a problem or a difficulty and how to go about addressing it, looking at the relationships and their implications. And so the idea is that I mean, some of you have been here for several sessions and some of you are new to this environment as we work through these sessions. The idea is to develop a relationship map that shows different things that are interconnected and the relationships that they have that cause influences for the way that things unfold. During the two prior sessions, we were working on developing a relationship model about how to go ahead and look at the situation from a systemic perspective. What are the things that you should look at and pay attention to and ask questions about? And after we did that for two sessions, the comment was, maybe this would make more sense if we actually decided or tried to look at a particular situation as opposed to all of this generalized navel gazing and see if we might develop a deeper understanding about something. So Harry proposed the question of what constitutes a sustainable localized food system for a rural community. And would you like to elaborate on that question a bit as we start, Harry?
Well, sure. I mean, we can go back to the very basics, and I think that's probably a reasonable place to start. So traditionally, when we were an agrarian society, we would have a local farm. So you have soil. You have the first piece of this puzzle is going to be healthy soil. And then we're going to grow, we're going to have agriculture, we're going to grow food from that soil, whether it's feedstock for livestock or produce or grain. Then we're going to have our means of distribution, which is going to be a wholesaler or retailer or restaurant traditionally, or direct to consumer market.
Okay.
And then our consumptive patterns.
All right. So one thing that I personally have found useful is to first understand why something is a problem to begin with. Why should we do something about it? Not what's causing it, but what is the implication of it being the way it is. So from why should we pay attention to looking at a sustainable localized food system for a rural community? Do we have any problems in a rural community getting food now?
Yeah. So
why is this a problem?
Well, there's a couple. So one is going to be that we have a large corporate presence that provides substandard food and extracts the revenue that comes from that food so that it's not put back into the community to improve the development of the infrastructure that would otherwise be there. So say Dollar General or Walmart, when they come in, no one can compete with their prices because of economies of scale. They'll bring in their presence in the community sort of automatically sidelines any efforts to develop a sustainable food system within the community that would have a feedback loop from which that system could grow. So you have a vicious cycle versus a virtuous cycle.
Okay.
So that everything leaks out. Nothing remains within the community, basically.
So that the implication of not having this is that the community deteriorates. What's a good word?
So in a constant, it deteriorates, constant state of diminishment.
Community becomes dependent on these outside sources.
And they become undesirable places to live, so they can't attract industry. Because how do you get an engineer to live in a place that whose only food supply chain is Walmart?
Okay, all right. Dependent on outside resources and can't attract industry.
Can't. Or it's more difficult to, however you want to. Also, and I'm not sure how we want to put this, but a food system typically reflects the personality of the community in some sense. So there's a sense of place associated with that and a sense of pride. And that is gone with the presence of the extractive industry or the extractive retailer. So people become more
okay. So in one of the reasons for doing it is that it promotes community health.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I've mentioned before that moderating the session and manipulating the map makes me completely unable to monitor the chat flow at the same time that I'm working on this, and to make everybody else wait while I attempt to absorb what goes into the chat window is just rude, I think. So if you want to put things in the chat window is captured and it's posted so it doesn't get lost. So if you want to put comments there that you want to make sure that we don't lose, then I encourage you to do that. If you want things to actually make it to the map now, you need to speak up and say we should go ahead and make a connection from here to here for this reason. Okay? So I'm not saying don't put things on the chat window, though I'm saying that I simply can't follow it. If somebody else sees something in the chat window that should be brought up, please go ahead and surface it. Okay. So we sort of at this point I think have a sense of the negative implications of not doing this. And we have a sense of the benefit that it would provide by doing it. Then what is it that we have to do to actually foster the development of a localized, sustainable food system?
That's what's going on.
Seems to be just Gene that think we're all connected.
He's got his mic. Gene, your mic's muted.
Gene, you're muted.
anybody have a cell phone or something for sending a text?
Are you there? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can.
Oh, okay, I
Now
don't know.
you're fine.
For some reason on this end, everything went away, and I couldn't find the toolbar, so that I couldn't turn my. I mean, everybody's saying your mic's not on, but duh. So this should do absolutely. Oh well, seems like the recording has been continuing to run. So we'll see how this turns out in a nightmare. I guess I've had worse nightmares. So somebody wanted to tell me about the last thing that I said before I was more confused than at the moment. Okay, so then at this point, I think we're looking at what is it that we have to do to begin to establish this food system? What is it that supports it or enables it directly?
Local production and local consumption. I mean, very simple. So a food system should be demand driven.
Okay, so we need local production.
Based on local consumption.
You've also got what I would call seasonal availability. For some reason, those of us north of the Mason-Dixon do enjoy our citrus fruit all year round, which it's not even available here locally any time of year.
I would say too, I think that a lot of areas do have local production and local consumption, but they're mismatched. There are other forces at play. So for me, when I think about the most important barriers to local food system, it has to do with the influence of the largest entities in the system that influence policy at all levels and planning, which is why you have these, Main Street businesses being replaced by large-scale retail.
Sure.
So Katie, you're talking about negative policy influences?
Well, policy influences that skew the system in favor of the largest entities in the system. So it's, positive and negative is a value judgment. So I think it skews away from local food systems and toward larger scale entities that are hooked into the global economy.
So
I see a self-reinforcing loop here. And it's all driven by economic. The larger scale entities are cheaper usually, and that actually makes them better positioned to get people to buy their foods. And by having that skill, they also are better positioned to influence policy that helps skew the system towards their benefit.
let's say, okay.
Two other thoughts.
Well,
Go ahead, Gene.
Well, regarding Veronique's comment, is there something specific I should add to the map?
I was going to add two things, Gene. One is you've got just sheer economic dynamics at play here, where the nostalgic Norman Rockwell view that many people have of what farms or production agriculture should look like just isn't feasible anymore, just because of sheer economics. The second thing, and this sort of links off of policy, I think, is there's a lot of politics involved in this. And for example, I don't know if this is still true, but when I was growing up, the price set for milk was based on how close or how far you were from some town in the state of Vermont, which makes no sense if you're in Wisconsin or California, but yet that was the policy of how milk pricing was done, you know, at least 20 years ago. And I'm guessing at the rate the Fed's changed things, at least U.S. I'm talking about, that's probably still pretty much the standard process as we see dairy farms going out right and left.
Okay, so is there a comment that I should put someplace or something?
So, Gene, can you say economic dynamics favor?
Veronica, I lost you. Veronica, I'm not hearing you at the moment.
The extractive state that we find ourselves in. Because again, and I don't know if everybody's on here, but when we define local, should be, I think, this is again just me, should be defined as local. Local is defined as reasonably available, and that could be 300 miles away. In fact, USDA is 400 miles away. So, you know, unfettered economic dynamics, free market, you know, however you want to look at it. I would argue that if we really practice without the influence of lobbying, that the other impacts associated with the dynamics of localizing that system and forcing industry to pay the externalities that they don't currently pay, the economic dynamics would favor the local development. But since the interventions are there, then the current, so I would say current economic dynamics, let's say that.
Yeah, I that you're making about externalities not being included is actually what causes that, right?
Partially, and then the other piece to that, though, is the other economic regional, not necessarily what we would commonly think of as local, the regional other economic activity and the benefits of the community interactions that are associated with that create a value that we don't yet measure, but we should, that would include other economic development and other industrial development, which would be much more sustainable again, and going back to the externalities again that you just mentioned.
I would want to add too, I think that in terms of the definition of a local food system, I really have, I push back a lot against, you know, a lot of the mainstream definitions, which kind of draw a boundary and try and quantify like a local food system is, you know, food grown within 100 miles or 400 miles. I think that really is a problem in terms of leading our minds, you know, into the quantitative rather than, you know, really focusing on the processes involved in the food system. And when I worked on local food issues a while back, you know, we found it much more powerful to talk about localization of the food system. So to emphasize the process, which was less about, you know, getting the food from X miles away and more about building that local economy, you know, trying to source food where possible from, you know, locally owned and operated businesses and farms. And that's actually a much more impactful and powerful lens than drawing a boundary. You know, because you could buy food, you know, from Walmart that sources from a farm, but it's not getting at the local food economy, the structure of the food economy, which is what we're, I think, ultimately wanting to intervene in.
Okay. Other thoughts? What is it that we do to encourage local production? I mean, so we have a question about what the definition of local actually means, right? I mean, we've talked about local in terms of distance-wise, and then there's local in terms of of what is currently sourceable based upon a seasonable sourceability. The comment that there are certain things that you just simply can't get in certain seasons locally. If you're going to have them, they have to come from somewhere else. So if you consider that difference, how do you manage the question about sustainable localized food system? I mean, it sounds like it loses meaning.
Well, it doesn't. And what Katie was just saying is localization. So you're not going to source everything. You're not. You're not going to put your community in a bottle, but you are localizing where possible. And if I want shrimp and I'm in central Pennsylvania, I'm going to try to buy shrimp from the Atlantic coast. I'm not going to try to buy it from Thailand. Nothing against Thailand, but I would like to source as locally as possible because I'm more impactful economically, and there's an attraction and there's a value in saying that this was just off the Carolina coast. We just caught it, the past week.
Yeah.
So you want to source as local as possible to benefit that community, which you're part of or closest to.
Yeah, in that region. And then you got an increased multiplier just from a quantifiable perspective. Your multiplier increases. But
it only does if you're buying from locally owned and operated businesses. So that's what I think is critical. Right?
That's right.
We don't want to be buying.
Retail.
Yeah. So we often see, Walmart or Safeway advertising local products because it's getting trendy, but that's not actually shifting the structure of the food economy. But what does is when we're buying, again, from locally owned and operated businesses that are sourcing locally. So I think, to kind of be constructive, I think that's, again, one of the key forces and a place where we want to intervene by creating and supporting market outlets for growers. So from the supply side perspective, when I talk to growers, they have fewer and fewer options for where to sell their produce. And increasingly, they're at the mercy of large-scale intermediaries, like Walmart or Archer Daniels Midland. And to the degree we can be creating local marketing opportunities for growers, that will build and bolster the local food economy. So that can look like a number of things, right? That can be supporting direct marketing, creating incentives for local business. I think, again, the way that I see a lot of the big businesses operating is to skew policy and planning structures in favor of them. So that's another place we could be intervening.
So somewhere in there, we want, purveyors, there's so many different types. Purveyor product.
So to me, the economic dynamics are really central to this whole question, because the policies basically impact the economic dynamics, right? At the end of the day, people are not going to buy food if it's substantially more expensive locally. So the fact that local food right now is more expensive is a big driver. At least if it's labeled locally, you pay a premium right now, and that's the dynamic that everybody's gotten used to. That may work for people who have a lot of money, but in general, it doesn't drive a sustainable food system.
But that's because there's no externalities being addressed.
Right. So the economics, again, to me, is really the central question of this whole thing. And the policies that are one thing, and then the non-inclusion of the externalities in the current economics dynamics are another driver for that being unfavorable right now.
Okay, so
not to further make this more complicated, but guess what it is? We're talking right now about distribution and availability. The other piece to that has to simply do with the aspect of hunger. And I know Gleaners is a big NGO in a lot of parts of the country, but one of the challenges that I've seen over and over wherever I've traveled is local health department policies often get in the way of otherwise wonderful available food being tossed out because there are certain health department requirements that prohibit it. And I know the food safety issue is a big one, but sometimes we've got to find a way to figure out how to nuance that a little bit better. I can't think of the number of conference banquets that I've been to where lots of empty seats with food sitting at them go unused.
You know,
Do you see that as a different than the policy influences that skew the system, though?
It is a policy issue, but it's not really about, in some ways it is, but in other ways it's not about what's available. It's about making it available.
Okay. There's more policy impacting distribution than a policy impacting production, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So what is it that encourages local production? We have several things that discourage local production. What would encourage a community to actually endeavor to promote more of its own local development?
Dean, one of the problems, I'll use as an example, I don't know if I told you, years ago, I owned a gas station. It had a Subway in there, and but I owned one. What I learned was you have to know something about business. But besides that, if you're going to own one gas station, you need to own 2 or 3 because everybody else got a discount on volume. And if you compare that to local producers and then look at Walmart and places like that, the volume is immense. Financially, it's very difficult to keep up with something like that. However, and this is just me, I am willing to pay more to go someplace local because it's important to me. So it's not, you know, I suppose the answer in some ways could be easy, but it's extremely complex. And there's so much politics involved.
Well, this is Bob. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm late and trying to catch up. But one thought I have is, and you probably covered it, was the niches within niches of the power of being transparent. Well, I do go out of town to get my shrimp because that's where it comes from. But if one had the awareness of how the local is interconnected with the region and with the world, and that transparency then could be powerful in sharing, as Gene would talk about, stories of how you are influenced in your local by being aware of how it's interconnected and not connected. And so you're working within systems within systems.
Yeah, so Steve Byers in Olympia. I'd like to echo what Bob was just saying, and I think there's a large component around awareness of quality of food, the difference of food, trying to encourage folks to be more connected to the land so that there's a sense of, you know, community stewardship toward food production. And when we start to do that, we see that people are very supportive of local food systems. And, you know, we don't, here in Olympia, we don't think too much about out competing Walmart. We just kind of ignore Walmart and do what we do with the local farms. There are a lot of local farms and a vibrant farmers market, as well as other means of community sustained agriculture and so on, or community supported agriculture. So I like the you know, there being a factor of awareness and education. I'm not sure where which loop that goes in, but that's an important part of it.
So an understanding that local production and local food system actually promotes community health, that understanding should promote a desire for local food, encouraging local production.
Yeah.
But it's the understanding that has to be there.
Yeah, except, Gene, this is Steve. You know, I'm very cynical, so I apologize, but you still have the problem, the financial problem. I know there's a huge, I forgot the name of the company, but they took them years and years to finally build a plant where I live. And they tried doing it in another place, and they kept pulling out. And they had business tactics that a lot of people can't get away with. And so a lot of the money issues, tax issues, disappear. It's, you know, it can be, and maybe this is where, you know, looking at it the way we are, I tend to make things difficult, and maybe it doesn't have to be.
I would say I think that you know, leading into the desire for local food element, I agree that it's important that public awareness of the benefits is an important driver of that. And I also agree with what was just said. I don't know who was speaking. Was that Larry?
No, it's Steve.
Oh, Steve. Okay, thanks. That I think there's something really important that needs to go on the map here, which is some kind of mindset that underlies or underpins local governments and state and federal government as well, incentives, which I've never really understood this, but I think there's a lack of awareness in local government in particular about the local benefits and multiplier effects of localized food systems. And so again, you have these local governments, and again with, you know, state and federal money incentivizing the wrong thing, right? There are these perverse incentives. And so that makes it's a big driver on why it's so difficult for local businesses to make it. And that includes regulatory structures, which are not tiered in a way that, you know, the regulation is kind of a one size fits all that is built for large scale industrial cheese making and processing plants. And so as a startup farm or value added entity, you just can't do it because you can't afford the, you know, $10,000 ceiling tiles in your tiny little cheese plant that are actually not even appropriate. So the incentive structures or one size fits all regulation is a major driver of the scaling up of food systems and gets at what you were just saying, Steve, I think.
That's something that we've been addressing at Extension, and that's critical, is having an affordable processing facility. And we've been getting pretty innovative with it, but yeah, that has been a barrier.
Larry Paul here. One thing that is no one's even seems to be looking at is that this kind of local farming, it's hard, it's dirty, physically demanding, and who is going to do it? You cannot go into middle class or any kind of local high school and say, hey, you want to be a farmer? They're trying to get out of that work. There is, and this is where you get into politics. Economics is great. Economics is very important, and you cannot dismiss economics from politics. But we've got access to tens of thousands of people that will do the work down in the detention centers on the borders. They have the expertise and the mindset and the ability to actually do the kind of work that needs to get done. Because we have a little group here that does our HOA gardening. And I'll tell you what, when they bring in the gringos, they don't last a week.
Respectfully disagree about the assumption that young people in this country aren't willing to go into farming. There's a huge upsurge of young people who do want to go into farming. And there are a number of studies done by the National Young Farmers Coalition, for example, that give numbers to that. And they're just facing barriers. So I think particularly in the local food economy, there are a number of people who want to be entering that field. I agree that we need to be addressing immigration problems, because here in California, as I'm sure many places, we're having, the lack of labor is a huge issue, but that's more in the large scale industrial farms. So I think there's some more complexity.
Thanks. Katie, may I address that from a historical and personal perspective? I grew up on a family farm in western Illinois, 400 acres, technologically savvy, corn, wheat, soybeans, cattle, and hogs. And that has become, through my generations, an industrial farm.
Exactly.
And I could not afford to be in it. I could not afford to amass $3 or $4 million of capital investment to make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and stay married. And the diversity of the crop that I could grow with that level of capital investment narrows as I make the investment. So as I make that more and more intense, expensive, specific investment, I'm now limited to corn and soybeans. On the other hand, I now live in northern Colorado, and so let's say tonight I go to Cheyenne, Wyoming for supper, dinner. And it's one of the larger towns in Wyoming. And let's say that everybody has an inclination for locally grown food. But the menu says fresh shrimp flown in daily. No, that's a traditional thing to say on a menu, but no, not in Wyoming. It's at the intersection of two major interstates. But no, the seafood is not flown in to landlocked Cheyenne daily. No.
It was frozen last month.
Yes, in Chile maybe, or wherever, So this is complicated.
That's why we're on this call.
Okay. But there, if any of you have resources, you can email them to me directly at systemswiki@gmail.com, or post them in the chat window, and I will see that all of the resource links get populated into here. So yes, there needs to be a level of understanding and awareness that the current direction of our food system isn't actually healthy, doesn't taste good. There's nothing in it but fertilizer and pesticides. So from a longer term perspective, we need a more sensible answer that is sustainable.
Well,
so how do we promote that?
Well, I don't know if you're aware or anybody else is aware, but and now this is just Wisconsin that I know of, when they started developing margarine as opposed to butter, margarine was outlawed in Wisconsin because of the what they thought it would do to the farmer and the dairy farmers. And that doesn't answer your question, except that generally, sometimes generally, going back and looking at historically what has happened in this kind of a situation, and where did things, get messed up, and where we can intervene.
Well, are there communities where this is actually succeeding? The communities that are, in fact, continuing to develop more broadly local production?
Yeah, very few, because while they're in the process of doing that, they all.
I lost you, Steve.
They're doing all of this, but then they also have to fight, the larger companies.
Okay.
More and more places are, have the farmers markets. I'll turn my microphone off. My dog is.
Okay. Thank you.
I come from an area where there's a group called Organic Valley, and they produce a large amount of food locally, but then they ship it all over the United States. So it's kind of the whole culture around within a 100-mile radius has embraced organic farming, and they make too much, and so they ship it out. So it's kind of
and
the
what
opposite.
happens with that, I can't say 100%, but as they get bigger and bigger and maybe even get bought out, they're going to become like Walmart and, the other places too, as much as they may not want to.
Right. And the owner or the guy that started this, that's probably why he still doesn't wear shoes to work, I guess. But it might be all for image.
Okay, so if anybody can find or identify some communities where there is an ongoing active development migrating in this direction, post the references so we can look at them. I mean, there must be some, and rather than look at all of the you have to understand the things that get in the way of doing this. But if you can study places where it's actually succeeding, maybe you learn something to save yourself some pain of going through the failing steps yourself.
You need to define success. You're certainly not going to define it the way a larger place is going to. I think if a community can sustain itself by producing its own, people buying from there. And that happened where in the town that I live in, it's a historical town. It's one of 3 Greenbelt towns built during the Depression by Eleanor Roosevelt. Things were going well. Actually, I can show you some stuff from that, Gene.
Okay.
I'll have to pick it up.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, are there some other things that come to mind from those of you on the call in terms of what do we add to the map in terms of relationships? After this call, I will go back and listen to the video and see if I can pick out other things to add, though the definition of the things that we put on the map need to be clarified, and an explicit definition of what the relationships are that we're talking about. So we're at a point where we have an understanding of why it's a good thing to do, some of the things that get in the way of doing it. And I think Harry was talking about initially that you have to not only who's going to do it, where is it going to be done? Are the resources available to actually produce local. I mean, I noticed, I watched, not too long ago, I watched a couple of videos about people who had taken factories that were no longer being used to manufacture what they used to, and they're actually growing food in multi-tiered environments, so that their growing season is 365 days a year, and they're almost at a point of being profitable, which I thought was, a marvelous use of no longer used structures, and to get out of this difficulty about there are only there are seasons where things are available. They could make anything available throughout the year.
Gene, at some point in these loops, you still need to consider the pressure put on by the business community, not the local, but by the business community. And does that, and that's a question, does that affect the local government and what they do?
The business community pressuring,
well, that happened pretty much everywhere a Walmart was. At first people didn't want it there, but boy, those prices are hard to beat. So the pressure put on by them, and how does that influence pressure to the local government, causing them to do whatever they have to do?
I'm still not following which business community you're referring to.
Well, okay, you have any local, let's take food, the grocery store. You may be able to get better stuff, and I would much rather do it, buy locally, but the bigger companies are going to pressure. Pressure comes in terms of lower prices, and then the other piece to that, and again, I'm very cynical, and I can't believe it's not going on, is what is the pressure on the local government to...
I'll take some.
Is this what you meant? Business pressure from large providers?
Yeah, you got it. That's it. Yep.
Okay.
One other aspect to this is, what are the expectations of the consumer? And we've all been brainwashed, at least in this culture, that if it's not a perfect carrot or if it's not a perfect apple, it's no good. We don't want it. And my kids just reject stuff if there's a blemish, and it just makes me crazy because you can cut the blemish out. But a lot of stores throw a lot of food out because there's a blemish or it's not perfectly shaped. And I'm aware of a movement out there called the ugly food movement, where people are actually buying their produce because it's imperfect. Has the same nutritional value, and you can still use it, but it's not that perfect bright red Washington apple that they've marketed so well to us.
I think that the ugly food movement is great, and it's also bringing in new business opportunities and opportunities for profit for some local businesses. And it just sparks a thought for me too, which is, is this group interested in systemic solutions? Because I think there's a lot of great stuff happening, like the food waste movement and stuff that's kind of making positive change, but it's not actually shifting the structure, the underlying structures. And that's fine. I'm just curious if people in this group are interested in that level of conversation.
Both, I would say both, and on that, it does seem good to get food waste on this map somewhere, both for the inefficiencies that keep the cost higher. Sometimes food is actually destroyed in order to keep the cost up, and different things like that are behavior level. But I think we definitely want to work at from both sides of the problem. That's my sense.
So what I'm a little having trouble with right now is trying to solve, because there's so many aspects to this local food, non-local food system, if you will. Some of them don't all move in the same direction. So, for instance, the environmental aspects may not always drive towards local production. At the same time, if you need to make a living for local farmers, environmental concerns might not be the first thing on your mind. So I agree that the current food system has problems on a multi-dimensional problems, but it's just saying we need to move to a local food system might not solve all your problems. Does that make sense? It just feels like there's too many conflicting parts here.
There are typically too many conflicting parts, which is why we understand so few things so little. I don't think that this particular topic is any more complicated than tons of them that we deal with on an ongoing basis. I had a conversation with someone this morning, and they see global Capra. All right. Capra. As Fritjof Capra was reading Lester Brown's Plan B 3.0, after he got into it, he drew this map about the fact that our intent to pursue unlimited growth on a finite planet raises a multitude of problems, and they're all interconnected. So, and if you drill into any one of these, you end up with the same kind of situation where there are a multitude of relationships which make it difficult to understand and difficult to deal with. They talked about problems, and then they talked about wicked problems, and now they're talking about super wicked problems. And the idea is that I think we have an inability to think about more than one thing at a time, right? And because there are so many things interrelated, at least from my own perspective, I can't get a handle on what I think I understand unless I draw maps. And then I look at the map and I can see a multitude of relationships, and I begin to get a sense of the extent to which all of the things are interconnected and interrelated, and gives me a level of understanding that I can't get a hold of if I simply think about it in my head from one point to another. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, Gene, I like what you just said, and I like the picture that we saw briefly, because like you talk about, it seems like the story has to include the whole ecosystem as an overarching understanding, but you have to have a lot of the niches interconnected, and so there's a transparency in that a good business in any environment then can understands how they're interconnected with the importance of the whole system working. And so if the collective is aware of that information, good business practice, they're going to have to be more transparent and maybe embrace some of the local work. But it can't come from just living in your own little niche. You have to have some overview of the interconnection that the last map was.
When is your thing finished?
Pretty soon, I think.
Can be done anytime you hang up. Anytime you get tired of listening to us. That's why when these sessions happen, my wife actually leaves the house. She goes away. She's been listening to this stuff for the last 40 years, and she's more than tired of it. All right. Additional things that you think should go on the map, even if, in other words, things that are related that you're not quite sure how they're related, but we should capture the topic so we can figure out where it goes later?
Well, I'm going to assume you're hearing me now. So
yes, Eric.
So I think one of the things we need to do as a society is shift our value system. Food is still totally unrelated, unrated as one of the most important things we need, along with food, clothing, and shelter. I mean, those are pretty basic things. And as soon as you start getting a larger portion of the public shifting their value system and understanding the value of keeping those local systems in place and the spin-offs, the economic spin-offs. I happen to live on an island of 4,000 people. So it's a fairly contained system. If we do the best we can on this island, we're going to produce 5% of our food, and the rest is going to come from elsewhere.
Where's the island, Eric?
Gabriel Island off the coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia.
Okay.
And we have a number of things happening here. I'm also spearheading a program for lower income families and seniors. And we give them $21 a week to spend at the local farmers markets, which gives them a shift in value of their food systems. Plus it puts more dollars in the farmers' pockets. And we're talking, it's a fairly small scale thing, but it's talking $10,000 back into the local community economy, which, spins around in the community 4 or 5 times. So it's a step in the right direction. And education. I've heard a couple of people talking about education. It's education, education, education. And we've kind of been dumbed down in our food systems. Supermarkets,
I have a
joke.
comment here. Sorry, guys, but it's not just education. There's just a lot of people who cannot afford to buy local food right now.
Okay, well, this food system I'm talking about is supported by our government, by the health department and the government. And there's several $1 million put into this process across British Columbia, encouraging people to buy local, support their local farmers markets. And I know for a fact the program is expanding. So it's just one different model.
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
So I mean, it ties together in numerous places in terms of the incentives that are provided to have an effect on the economic dynamics, which improve the desire for local. You're giving them money to spend in the farmers market to encourage local production, because you're increasing the demand. I mean, you're increasing local consumption, which increases local production. And it's finding places that you can begin to encourage. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that you can make happen overnight. You figure out ways to take steps in the right direction and continue to promote those steps over time. I know I've read several books lately on the no-till soil movement for growing crops, and it's a multi-year effort to renew the soil so that it's healthier and it produces better over time and survives better in drought conditions because of the way that it's been developed. And some farmers say, no, I'll just go buy more fertilizer.
And those systems have been around for quite a number of years, but you're talking more industrial systems there. And where I'm coming from is more the market garden level of things, which I recognize and acknowledge that it's not going to solve the whole problem.
Okay. Other thoughts? Well, if that's the case, then suppose we go ahead and end the session for today. I will go ahead and send out a copy of the video and a link to this model. I would encourage you, if you don't have a Kumu username and password, I would encourage you to get one. Just go to kumu.io and sign up. It's free. And then go here and click on issues, and you can add comments to this particular thread that's already started, or you can click on any element or any connection that's part of this map. You can click on it and say comment, and you can start
a thread on that comment.
What does this mean? And if you do that, it will then go ahead and put an asterisk on that, so it tells people that there's already a discussion thread started on that particular element. And you can do that on an element or a connection. What's the influence here? So it will then go ahead and put an asterisk on that connection saying there's already a thread started there. So, and the idea is that you put comments in the map in the hopes that we work on those comments and try to figure out how to continue to evolve or develop the map based upon the ongoing feedback, so that we get a better understanding. So I'll send out the link to the map and the video as soon as the video gets processed. And then over the next few days, before the next session, which is next Tuesday, not on Thursday the 4th, which was ludicrous on my part, I'll go ahead and see what I can glean from the video to work on the map some more before the next session. And I'll send out a revised version of it, hopefully a couple of days before the session, and we'll see what we can, to what extent we can evolve things between now and then. And if you find good resources or references that ought to be included, we'll go ahead and get them wired into the map also. Okay? Is anybody still here?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Gene.
All right.
Gene, I asked for a wake-up call.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Talk to you all next week.
Take care, Gene.
Bye.
Thank you.